What is up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Questions with Caleb, the series where we do a deep dive on anything and everything that interests you. Today is going to be a little bit of a different episode because instead of answering the questions that you guys have submitted, I thought it was about time that I respond to the question, or more specifically, the comment that I get on almost all of my videos, or in the comment section of most any Christian video made by non-Christians and the more aggressive atheists. You see, you read, the average non-Christian will say that Christians as a whole are intolerant bigots. I made an entire video all about that. I'll make sure to link it in the description down below. Don't forget to check that out. But if somebody's more educated, considers themselves to be more intellectual, their number one gripe against us is that we're dumb. That basically the only reason you would get into faith is because you don't want to do the heavy lifting of having to figure out what to believe and what to think on your own. And this idea has been presented by everybody from Bill Maher all the way to Bill Nye, the science guy. And inevitably, lots of Christians come out of the woodwork to defend the intellect of Christian individuals, and they bring up all of these historical figures that were Christians that did all these incredible scientific things and all that. And since there are so many videos like that on YouTube, I thought I would take a very different approach. If you've watched any of my videos, you know that one of my main goals is to help Christians understand kind of the perspective of the rest of the world so that we can empathize better with them, so we can better defend our position and also keep ourselves safe from some of the dangerous ideas that other Christians bring into church culture that would pull us apart from the inside out. So today I'm going to be answering the question, why do so many people think that Christians are stupid? Well, I think a lot of this boils down to kind of three main things. We're going to start with the first. And the fact that there are pockets, not a majority, but there are pockets of Christianity that seem to unapologetically accept anti-intellectual ideas. Let me give you some real-world examples of what I'm talking about. I was recently watching a YouTube video where this guy was basically talking about how useless the top 5 best-selling Christian books were, excluding the Bible. And he was saying that all of these authors were snake oil salesmen and that these books weren't any good for Christians and all these things, which was fine. But I was blown away by the number of people in the comment section that were saying, well, of course these books are useless. The only book you need to read is the Bible. That's the only book that is profitable for a Christian. And my jaw hit the desk reading comment after comment that said more or less that. And don't get me wrong, I love the Bible. I think it's perfect. I think it's inerrant. If I had to pick one book for everybody in the world to read, it would be the Bible. But to say that it is the only book that is worth reading, that's a little crazy to me. If you're going to try to rewire your house and you look to the book of Leviticus to learn how to do that, you're going to die in the process. I'll give you another example. I was watching an interview between Stephen Furtick and a well-known Christian psychologist, and they were talking about scripture and how it talks about so many places, trying to take those thoughts captives and controlling what you think. And the psychologist was basically explaining how the brain functions when doing that. When you're talking about trying to control a thought or limit how long it lingers, the biology behind that, how the brain works. And it was fascinating. It was a great interview and I really enjoyed it. But there were so many people in the comment section that said things like, this is witchcraft. This is New Ageism. If we needed psychology, Jesus would have given it to us when he was here on earth. All of these kinds of things. And what blew me away even more than those comments being made in general was the fact that I saw most Christians just at least didn't have the interest or were too afraid to engage with people making those comments. I was the first one to reply to many of them and bring up the fact that all of the reasons why that didn't make any sense. I think Christians maybe are scared of conflict or don't want to cause division. And the problem is I don't make those comments or reply to those people because I expect to change their mind, although that'd be great. But the reason that I reply to those people is so that when non-Christians or other Christians are scrolling through those comment sections, they see somebody push back on those inherently anti-intellectual ideas. And so I think as Christians, if we want the world to take us seriously as thinkers, we can't allow those people to run around and have the loudest voices. Because I'm sure many of you are watching this and thinking, well, Caleb, those people are the minority. Those aren't what most Christians think. And I absolutely agree. I don't think 50 or 60% of Christians think those things. But the problem is that those people are the ones that get the most attention, the ones that are most likely to comment on every single video on the entire internet. And so we have to be quick to comment back and let the world know that that's not what mainstream Christianity thinks if we want to be taken seriously. The second reason that I think a lot of people mistakenly think the Christians aren't very smart is a little bit of what the non-Christians alluded to in the comment sections that I was referring to, in the fact that there are a lot of people that join into Christianity because they don't understand how the world around them works. When you are lost and when you are confused, it only makes sense that you are searching for answers, and Christianity is great in giving people answers. And there's nothing wrong with that. You shouldn't walk into faith thinking that you have it all figured out. But the problem is those lost people don't necessarily know what to look for in leadership, look for in a church. And many of them end up in churches that not only don't encourage you to ask ideas and challenge the status quo, but they actively discourage it. And so you end up with a good portion of Christians that came to Christianity to find answers, but then were never taught how to think critically for themselves. And so the first time they confront somebody or are confronted by a atheist that has just a little bit of information that they haven't heard before, all of a sudden they fall apart. And the really unfortunate part of that is the fact that while many of us would see it as, well, you know, maybe some pastors are insecure and so they don't want to encourage people to ask questions they may not be able to answer, a non-believer is going to look at that and say, well, this is about power. Right? And this may seem odd to a lot of Christians because we kind of like to sweep this kind of stuff under the rug, but most atheists are well aware of church history. You know, there were sections of history within the Catholic Church where priests were charging people to get their relatives into heaven. Basically, if you had somebody die and you weren't sure they got to heaven, you could pay a priest to pray them there. And obviously that's the kind of stuff that we don't like talking about, we don't like addressing, because obviously those were dark times in church culture as a whole. But the only reason that something like that was able to continue was because the priests were controlling who read the Bible and in what language. And to the point where pastors can control how smart or intellectual their congregation becomes, all of a sudden that power dynamic can become very skewed in the wrong direction. And so when an atheist or a non-Christian is looking at the church and saying, well, why in the world wouldn't you want your people to be free thinkers? Instead of thinking, oh, well, maybe it's insecure leadership, it's churches that don't know better, they're going to immediately think that the goal is to try to keep people in that sheep mindset. And so it only makes sense that they would then look at Christians and say, well, you're sheep, simply blindly following your leadership. And the third reason that I think a lot of people are confused about Christians and how smart we are or aren't is the fact that, unfortunately, as a faith, we are not very good at communicating or aligning our priorities properly. What do I mean by that? Well, if I were to walk up to the average Christian and ask them to name me their top 5 Christian bands, they could do it like that. It wouldn't take 30 seconds for them to name those off. But if I asked the average Christian to name off their favorite Christian philosopher or their favorite apologetics speaker or whoever it is, most Christians couldn't give you one, little alone 5. I mean, if I say Hillsong, everybody knows who I'm talking about. If I say Ravi Zacharias, virtually no one does. And a lot of times, a non-Christian will sit back and say, well, that shows where your priorities are. If everybody knows the biggest speaker and the biggest band, but can't tell you who the biggest Christian philosophers are, the biggest Christian theologians, all of a sudden it leads them to believe that we have very little interest in growing intellectually and maybe just growing within our own subculture, trying to keep an echo chamber of our own ideas and our own thoughts in order to keep out the rest of the world. And I bring up this topic not to bash any big bands or any big speakers, because those are integral parts of growing the body. But we do at some point have to say, okay, how many more world famous bands do we need in comparison to the number of great thinkers that we are trying to promote in our churches? The people that we're featuring on our Instagram feeds are these people that are going to help us to think differently about our theology and our philosophy and help us to grow from an intellectual perspective. And please hear me, I am not trying to bash the church as a whole. I think there are a ton of incredibly intelligent Christians. But I can't blame the world for thinking that we aren't always some of the most logical individuals when oftentimes we are sending the wrong messages with all of the things that we talked about today. So I want to encourage, if you are a Christian, to take the time to defend the faith against people that are spouting out ideas that are going to send the wrong message to people. When you hear somebody comment that you don't need to read any books but the Bible, speak up. I understand that it's not always fun and you don't want to get in an argument, but ultimately you're going to do more damage by being silent and letting the world believe that most Christians actually think that than whatever damage you could do by getting into a small argument on Facebook. And if you are a non-Christian, please take the time to look up some great philosophers within the Christian faith. Look up the people that were great scientific minds that believed in God, because I think you would be surprised at the number of people that you already know in respect to their accomplishments that also had a strong faith in Jesus. Well, that's all that I have for you today, guys, but I really want to hear what you have to think. Have you been accused of being dumb or not intellectual enough by an atheist or a non-believer? I'd love to hear your story. If you are an atheist watching this, I would love to hear your thoughts on everything that I said, whether you thought I was on point or off point. But until next time, guys, we love you very much. Don't forget to check out all of our content at OTK Media on all of our Facebook, Instagram, and all those platforms. If you'd like to support what we are trying to do, it's patreon.com/OTK Media. Until next time, we love you very much. Bye-bye.